tries to destroy my orchard, I bankrupt her and get her house torn down. Well, let's start a few years in the past. My great-grandparents planted an orchard. It's now at least 120 years old. My grandparents and my parents were really proud of the peach trees growing in it and did their best to keep them in good health as well. We always threw a big party when the peaches were ready to be harvested and invited all of our friends and neighbors to it. I loved those parties. The neighbors on the property to the south of our orchard were particularly fond of our peaches. There were a bunch of fine old people, and me and the old man Sam were pretty good friends. He taught me a lot about woodworking with hand tools only, and we had some great evenings in his workshop, and we finished many a good whiskey in there together. In return, he got a lot of fine peaches, marmalade, homemade peach liqueur, etc. Sadly, he died a good 10 years ago. Cancer's real. His wife followed soon after, and many suspected it was of a broken heart. They had no kids, so all their property was left to the state, except his tools and whiskey collection, which he had gifted me a few weeks before he died. In comes Karen. The name really speaks for itself. Haircut, attitude-ness, the whole deal. We hadn't had the kind of money to buy it at the time, as we had some dire straits the years before and our savings were all gone. The first thing she did, before she actually moved in, was to go around and making demands of the neighbors of the surrounding properties. When it was finally our turn to listen to her gibberish, she told us that we needed to remove half of the trees as the leaves were blowing on our property. We told her in a polite way that we won't comply to her demands, as the orchard is a vital part of our family heritage tradition life and has been there for at least 120 years. She was pretty pissed, but did nothing for the time being. There are some things you need to know before I continue with the story. The workshop I mentioned before was situated right at the border to our property. It was a small timber frame building, at least 160 to 180 years old. The regulations in my state are pretty strict concerning old structures. Every structure over 100 years is protected, and you need a special permission to tear it down. Failing to get this permission can lead to a hefty fine. To get permission to build a new building, it has to be up to code, and you have to ask your surrounding neighbors, and if they agree, you're good to go. Except there is one specialty in my county. You have to keep a certain distance to the border of the property to allow emergency services full access to your property. If one of these requirements isn't met, the building is illegal, or at least only partially legal, and can actually be ordered by court to be torn down. That might come in handy later. So, back to my Karen. After our first encounter with her, she did her best to pester the whole neighborhood. She got the neighborhood's dog put down because he allegedly attacked her brat. It later turned out she faked it. The dog was the sweetest and most innocent dog you could imagine. A Bernese mountain dog, big but a real teddy bear. Anyways, she later got us to stop doing our annual peach parties, as she called the police every time for various reasons. Noise complaints, we had a band playing there in the afternoon. Arson, we lit a fire in a few designated fire pits in the middle of our property, and she called the ATF on us, allegedly making moonshine. My dad had a license to distill our own consumption. In short, she was a real pain in the bum, and after 3 years, we decided it wasn't worth it to deal with different officers and law enforcement agencies every time we threw a party, and we decided to quit. After she had reached this goal, she resorted to pestering us to remove the orchard. We didn't cave in, and something started to get really fishy. Somehow, the tires of our trucks got slashed, eggs got thrown on our farmhouse, our cat disappeared and surfaced a few days later in a pretty rough condition. It looked like somebody had tried to cut his tail off. But don't worry, he healed up completely, but we actually couldn't prove that she did all that. Then the day came she made her biggest mistake. She had a company come in as a sort of secret operation and tear down the old woodworking workshop overnight. 2 days later, they started building a big garage or recreational center or a house right where the shop was. But she missed one fine detail, which got pretty important later on. She didn't ask for our permission, nor for the neighbors. A short while after, the trees right next to her property started to get sick. The leaves turned brown in the middle of summer, and the branches started to die. We lost our trees, and before we figured out the cause. Somebody had driven long copper nails into them. We had a suspicion, but we couldn't prove it. So we put up some trail cams. Perfectly legal, as it was on our own property. We caught her red-handed. My dad confronted her, She apologized, and my dad, being the way too nice guy he is, wanted to let her get off the hook. But not me. The nail she drove into our oldest tree was the final nail in the coffin. I started to investigate. I had some friends at the administration of our county and asked them to do some inquiries. Turned out, she hasn't applied for permission to tear down the old shop, nor for permission to build a new building. I further did some inquiries on the borderline of our property. Turned out, the old markers vanished over time and her building was about 3 feet on our property. After I'd gathered all this information, I presented it to my parents. At first, they were reluctant as they didn't want to start a neighborhood clash. But after I recalled all the things she did to us and our neighbors, they were in. So, let the games begin. First, we called the authorities on her for tearing down a protected building and presented them with the evidence we gathered. Then, we called the building authorities on her for building a building without permission, not up to code, and not only didn't she keep the required distance for the property border, she also built on our property without our permission. Long story short, turned out the workshop hasn't only been protected because of its age, but also because it was a historical landmark, which played a vital role in a conflict back in the 1860s. She got sued for this and had to pay a fine equivalent of about $150,000. She further had to demolish her newly built building, costing an additional $50,000, got fined for this too, about $83,000, and had to rebuild the workshop on her own expense, which was another whopping $154,000, as it had to be period correct up to the smallest detail. Means it had to be built with the correct materials, with hand tools only, and to the correct dimensions. As you can imagine, paying professionals to build quite a large timber frame building only by hand gets pretty expensive pretty fast. So all in all, it cost her an equivalent of $437,000 plus further expenses as lawyers, etc. This caused her to go bankrupt, so she had to sell the property in the end. Which my parents bought, by the way. Last I heard of her was that she moved back to the big city.
Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe to Reddit Originals for more videos like this. Oh, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our videos. We upload a video each day, so stay tuned.